There you go.
Okay. So any questions after the warping? Did everybody's warping go okay?
Yes.
Julie, you're looking like maybe not.
No, I have the wrong reed for the size of yarn that I was going to use. I don't have yarn that would work with the size of the reed that I have.
Oh,
And I can't find any shuttles. I know I have shuttles. I just can't find them anywhere. And work got really busy this week, so it just didn't happen.
okay.
So I'll listen and I will take in.
Take in all the things. So Elizabeth, did you send out the recording of last week to everybody too? Or just me?
Yes. Yep.
Okay.
I got the email.
Okay, good. So today is the day we deal with the weaving part, right? So let me get to my list of things that I want to make sure I talk about. Okay, so I'm going to go back to the pattern and I'm going to share this pattern with everybody again. Okay, everybody can see the pattern that we're working with?
Yes.
Okay, so remembering as you did as you were warping, doing this in color, you're going to use the same color order when you're doing your weaving. Okay, so you'll do 2 red picks, then you'll do 12 green ones, then you'll do 2 blue ones, and then 2 green ones, and then 16 blue ones, and so forth. I think I was also going to share, I was going to show you a picture of what the final thing mostly looks like so that you have a sense of what it is you're creating here. Okay, so this is basically the tartan that you're creating, except reverse the blue and the green. This was the first one I did, and then I decided I wanted it to be more blue than green, but this is basically the Davidson tartan. So one of the things as you're weaving that I'm going to talk about, and I've got myself set up here so that I can show some of the steps that I'm doing and some of the actual, here's what happens when I'm weaving stuff. But as you see, you've got quite a few places where you have changes of colors. So you'll have a blue and then you have a green for 2 or 3 or however many in there, and then you have blue again, and then you have green. Where you have one color and then you introduce another color just for a little short bit, and then you go back to the same color. That's one where it's easier not to actually change colors, and that's where having 2 shuttles is helpful for those of you on floor looms, because essentially what you'll do is you'll just put this, like going from this green to this black to this green, you basically just put this green on hold while you're doing the black. And as the black comes out, you'll catch the green for the picks that you make. And I'll show you what I'm talking about on that. I went a little bit further with the tartan that I have on my loom, that it looks a little bit different than the one you're working on, but the principle is still the same. The other thing about tartans that you want to keep in mind is that you really want your picks per inch to be the same as your ends per inch. So depending on how hard you beat, you may need to make some adjustments to make sure that you're not beating so hard that you either end up with way too many or not enough, because you want each of these places, like right here, you want them to be square. That's the idea here, is that if you've got the same number of picks per inch and ends per inch, each of these places is going to be square. So this will be square. This little black guy here will be square. This black guy will be square. The ones where you have the same color on top of the same color are the ones that should be square. Does that make sense? The ones that you have 2 colors together, those are probably not going to be square. Those will be rectangles of some variety or other. Let's see. Okay. Any questions so far about anything that we're dealing with? Okay. So just a reminder, for those of you who are using a floor loom, you remember how a 2-2-12 works?
What's the question? Not sure I understand what you mean.
Okay, so I guess the question is, do you know how to weave a 2-2-12?
You mean with the tie up, the way it's set
Yeah.
up? Yeah, it's all tied up, no problem. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Because this is one of those things that a 2-2-12 makes it really easy, because basically there's just four
Yeah.
four
1, 2, 2, 3, 3, 4, 1, 4.
right.
Okay.
Right.
But that's what you
So,
put in
so
there.
there's 4 picks that fit within one pattern repeat. So most of the time with tartans, they are usually in, at least a real tartan, are usually in groups of 4 threads. In some cases, like especially if you're using larger yarn, you'll end up with 2 threads instead of 4, because it's okay to officially cut things in half. And so with so normally, to keep track of where you are in the pattern as you're weaving it, you can usually keep track by where you are in the, if you're using 4, you're going to do 1 pattern repeat. Then if you do 2, you'll end up with half a pattern repeat, but then usually you'll have like 6 someplace else. And so then you'll be back to the same pattern repeat again. Let's see. Okay. So I have my phone set up so that I can show you weaving. So I'm going to move over to my phone. Hang on.
What do you think?
Okay, can you guys see that weaving?
Yeah, I can see it.
I can't see it. Where is it?
Well,
Oh, there it is.
Yeah, so you may have to shift around the, who's where.
Jeannie, you can spotlight the other camera, or Elizabeth, you could spotlight that one so that it pops up for everybody.
Yep, I'm working on that right now.
I'm glad you know how to do that, because I don't.
yeah, that's even better. Yeah, it's
Okay, there we go. Okay, so, and if you get where you can't hear me, let me know. Okay, so what I did with this one, I got to the point where I need to change from 1. So this is where I was talking about on this one, where I have an accent of 2 white threads right through here. So I got to the point where I am ready to put in my white thread. And I know several of you had some concerns about, what do I do with the beginnings and endings of the threads? And then this will also, I can show you how to carry the white, because I'm only going for 2 threads. So I don't really want to end this red one, because then I just I'd end up with four ends all right in a row. And so in order to be able to work on this, what I'm going to do is I'll put in the white, and I'll show you how to deal with the ends. I just have to remember where I am in my threading here. Where am I? Okay. I think it's right. Okay, so now remembering, I've got a floating selvage here too. Actually, I'm going to show you guys what this floating selvage looks like so that you know what that. So the floating selvage, when you look along the side, this floating selvage is hanging off up here. As soon as you put your shed down, now the floating selvage is kind of hanging out through the middle. Can you see that?
Yeah.
So now what's going to happen is that I'm going to go in. When I put this into the shed, I'm going to go over the floating selvage when I go in, and I'm going to go under it when I come out. So it's always making like a figure 8, where it's going over when you go in and under when you come out. Okay, and I'm going to leave, for me, I usually leave my tail about maybe 2 inches long, roughly. And then I will put that in. And then before I even bother to close the shed, I'm going to take this little tail. And since it went in over, I'm going to go in under. And then I'm just going to put it over the ones that are where the threads are down. And then I just do a little tuck so that it's, let's see, I went under the selvage, over 2, under 2, and over 2 more. So basically there's six threads there. And what I ended up doing then is I just make a little tie here. So when you look at this close, here's the thread that I'm starting with. And I'm just tucking it in under here. And then I'm wanting to make sure that my floating selvage isn't too tight, because otherwise it's going to be too tight. Okay, so that's what I'm doing with my end. Then I'm going to put my shed up, and I'm going to do my last little beat just to make sure that it's where I want it. So now if I'm going to come back here. And again, I'm going to go over the floating selvage and out the under this floating selvage. And for this, and so for those of you who were wondering about selvages, to make sure that they are even, what I do is I hold this floating selvage a little bit tight, and then I just snug up my weft to where it's nice and snug. I leave a gap of about, between probably 35 to 40 degrees. Then I put my shed down so that it's flat, and then I beat. Just like that. So now, if I was going for more than just 2 here, so since this would technically only be 2, I would cut this off and I would work it back around. Because I need to deal with this red thread, I'm going to just do a couple extras so that you can see how to carry this along. And the one thing I didn't do that I should have is when I snugged up the beginning of this white thread, I should have grabbed the red one and pulled it up tight, and I didn't. So maybe I will, let me go back and do that again, and I will show you how that looks. So I'm gonna unweave here just a minute. Okay, so now I've opened the shed that I had open before for the white. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to pull my little tail out. And when I wrap it under the floating selvage, I'm going to also wrap it under this red thread so that it's basically grabbing both of those. So it's going to go under the floating selvage. It's going to hang on to the little red thread. And then it's going to be just tucked under in a little thing snug to the floating selvage. So now it looks like this. Okay.
Oops.
Sorry, I dropped you guys. then I'm gonna do a little beat right there. And then if you don't like the way it's tucked, you can always retuck it. And this is where if you're using wool, what I'm working with here is cotton, and cotton is not nearly as flexible and happy when you're doing it, tucking it around in various places. Okay, so let's go back to do this next one. And again, I'm gonna hold my floating selvage. I'm gonna tuck this up tight. I'm gonna put my shed down so that it's flat, and then I'm gonna beat. Now, let's pretend that I needed to do 4 of these white ones instead of just 2. So what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna take my shuttle, I'm gonna put it under the red thread. And then I'm gonna open my shed that I need next. I'm gonna go over the floating selvage. And basically when I go under that red thread, I'm basically just snugging it up next to the floating selvage. So it's basically just nice and snug right there, being held up, just as it is. And then I'm gonna put my twist down, and then I'm gonna do my beat. And then if I was doing 4 of these, then I would also do the next one. And then I would bring it back. And then what I would do is I would snip off this white, because I'm done with it now. And then I'm going to open that same shed I had. If I can remember which one it was. And then I'm going to pull because this white came out under the floating selvage, I'm going to take it under the red thread again. And then I'm just going to take it and I'm going to put it over anywhere between 3 and 5 of the threads that are in here. Just like I did with the first one. I want to pull that the red thread that is just floating along the edge waiting to be woven. I'm just letting it hang there. Okay, and then when I close that, now this is all nice and tidy with my white ends. I'm going to tuck that under just a little bit better. And now you're white, done with your white, and you're ready to start with your red. And so the red is already connected. Let me see if I can remember where I am. And so then you would just move on to starting with your red. And then, so then when you pull your red through, just snug it up next to the selvage. And then it's just like you're just weaving plain. And then you'll beat from there.
It's so nice, neat when you do it.
Well, I will, as some of you probably know, I'm not a very fast weaver because I'm pretty OCD.
It works.
So what ends up happening, and one of the things that's a little bit unfortunate with tartans is that all of the ends that you're cutting off end up being on the same side. So what you end up with is all of these little things like this, where you've got all of your threads where you've changed colors. But as you can see, I very seldom go in very far. And the key thing with that is that, and I think for those of you who worry about everything coming undone, the most important part of that is to make sure that after you're done weaving, before you cut off all of those ends, wash your piece first in the washing machine, even if it's made out of wool. And then, because what will happen is when you wash it, then all of the threads will sort of expand and they'll fill in the spaces that were left there. And so then when you go to press it hard, You can just snip off all those ends and they will all be fine. But that washing piece is an important piece. Unlike knitting, where you don't really want to wash it when it's wool because it'll shrink and then you have a little felted thing. With weaving, even if it is wool or alpaca or whatever it is, you still want to wash it. And it might shrink a little bit, but it won't shrink a lot because there's not a lot of room for it to shrink. Okay, any questions so far? So one of the things that you'll need to do, and I'm gonna share my screen here again. I just have to remember which thing I want to share. Okay, so when you're looking at the color order here, places like this one where you're going from green to blue and then back to green. This blue, this green, you're gonna want to just carry like we did with the red one. Because you're going from green, you're doing a different color, then you're coming back to green. Now this green where you're only doing 2, again, it's a short little thing, but you're not going to be using green again for a while. So you'll want to cut it off and end it after you get done with that too. Now for this green, you could, and you probably would want to carry the blue along the edge of the green, because you're going from blue and then just 2 little greens and then back to blue. So you'll start this blue and then you'll just carry it along for the 2 greens. And then you'll do the 16 here. And in this case, what you'll do is you'll be keeping the blue alive for a long time. Because basically you're going to start it here. You're going to have these 2, then you're going to do 16. Then you're going to have 2 of the black, but then you're coming right back to blue, and then you've got 2 more black and 2 more blue. So you'll start this blue and you won't need to end it until you get to the end of this 2. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Yes.
And the reds, you're just going to start and stop. You'll do one where you put it in, you'll do one where and then you bring it back and then you end it. So it's always going to be very, very quick. Although as you're doing that red, you're going to, I would suggest when you start the red, like here, and when you're doing it again over here, when you're wrapping it around your floating selvage, also wrap it around the color that you're going to use next. So with the black, you'll take this red and you'll wrap one end around the black that you're going to carry. And then you're going to wrap it around the black again when you are ending it. Does that make sense? So sort of like what I did with the white. And that'll just keep it'll just be a little bit tidier so that you don't have a float of black underneath. You're basically anchoring that float with the beginning and the ending of the red.
Mhm.
Makes sense.
Yeah, makes sense.
And it makes it so that it's a little bit neater and you don't have quite so many ends that you're tying on and tying off, if you can just keep track of where they begin and where they end. So the blue, and the way this one works, the blue is going to carry a long ways, the black is going to carry a long ways, the red and the green, not well, the green actually goes pretty far too, because it's going to start here and then you pick it up again here, and then you pick it up again here and here. So it'll start with this 2 and it'll end with this 2.
Yeah.
And let's look at the actual thing again so that you can see that. Yeah, so this is where you're picking up the green right here. And then it's going to follow all the way through, and then you're going to end it right here. The black, you're going to start here. You're going to carry it all the way across, and then you're going to end it here. And then you'll just have one little piece of it right here that is just going to be a start and a stop. And this green will start here, and it will carry all the way over to the end of this green here. Does that make sense to everybody?
Yeah.
Okay. What other questions do you have about weaving this off? And I think if I remember right, this is, depending on how long your warp is, this is basically 2 repeats of the pattern. So this was 1 repeat to get it from the red accent back to the other red in the blue. That's the same kind of colors as what you're going to do to here. And then you're just going to do that red 1 time, and then you're going to repeat from the beginning. And then you'll put the red at the end.
So you did not hem stitch, you're just fringing it?
I did do a hem stitch.
Did.
The hem stitch is this red right here.
Okay,
So I usually do a hem stitch at the beginning, and I usually do a hem stitch at the end.
okay.
And then I fringe it. And I have found the hard way that it's much easier to hem stitch it when it's on the loom rather than doing it after you take it off. Because all of your warp threads are still under a certain amount of tension, so that it's much easier to get your needle in and under.
Could you demonstrate how you hem stitch?
Could I demonstrate hem stitch?
Yes, please.
Can I demonstrate it next week?
Sure.
Because I need to get to the end of something so that I can show you how it works.
Well, 2 or 3 stitches would be plenty.
Well, the thing is, in order to do it, you have to have a loose end.
This is true. This is true.
So I will get to the end of this weaving by next week, and then I can show you how to do the hem stitch.
That'd be great.
Just out of curiosity, has anyone ever tried doing a hem stitch in the middle of a project and then going back to weaving so that you'd have the ends hem stitch, but you'd have a decorative hem stitch in the middle?
I have, I think, because I did it when I made 2 scarves end to end. And basically the only thing is what you'd end up having to do is you do your hem stitch at the beginning, you'd weave your piece, you do your hem stitch, and then you're going to leave a fairly long space of unwoven threads on your warp, right? So that you have the what you want to make the fringe with on the other piece that you're doing. And so then you'll just advance the warp past where you need to start again. And then usually what I do is I usually weave about probably an inch and a half to 2 inches before I do the beginning hem stitch. So I leave like 3 times the width of the warp, just as a loose end when I start with whatever my beginning color is. Usually if you have 3 times the warp, that is usually enough to be able to get all the way across the hem stitch.
Okay.
And so then I'll weave, my 1.5 to 2 inches. Before it gets too close to the beam, I will end up doing my hem stitching. The only thing that's different is usually when I'm hem stitching at the beginning, I'm hem stitching from left to right. And when I end the project, I'm usually hem stitching from right to left. Which means you kind of have to wrap your head around how it's going to work.
Yeah.
Boy, I'd like to see you do it.
But yeah, so there wouldn't be any problem being able to doing a hem stitch in the middle of a project.
So how many threads do you go around on a worsted weight when you're hem stitching?
You know, I almost always go around 4,
Okay.
regardless of what the weight is.
Mm, okay.
Even though with a worsted weight, you could go around 2 and then just have 2 in your fringe if you didn't want super bulky fringe. And I don't remember on this, this project. I can't remember how many I put in how many I fringed with. Of course, I think I did this particular one, I think I did with a lighter weight yarn than what I did with the worsted one. The first time I taught the class, I had people using crochet cotton and they had way more threads and it ended up taking them a lot longer. So then I did one using worsted weight and it was a little bit easier for a class because it warped faster and it also wove off faster. But yeah, the only thing about how, and it also partially depends on, usually when after I hem stitch, I usually take all of the threads that are in each stitched group, and I use them as my fringe so that they're all right together. Unless I make a mistake and then I have loops different places. But so if you wanted to have finer fringe with a worsted weight, you might want to hem stitch with just 2 and then just fringe together 2 pieces instead of 4. So that would be designer's call as to what to do with that. Other questions or things that you're thinking about or worried about when you just start to weave?
I guess trying to keep track of counting when you're doing 16 or 12 passes.
You know, the easiest way to do that is to look at where you have one of the little accent colors and just count the weft color along one of those, because each one of those is basically going to be 1 pass. And so then it's with those little narrow stripes, it's really easy to say, okay, I've done 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6,
Okay.
or 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12. And you can also keep track of it by how many pattern repeats you've done. So once you've done your 1, 2, 1, 2, 2, 3, 3, 4, 4, 1, then as soon as you start over, you know you've done 4. And if your beading is even and you've got the same number of picks as you have ends, when your little solid colors are square, you'll know you're close.
Okay.
And I have usually found when you're first starting, usually it's the tendency is to beat it harder and make it short. So I would say initially beat lightly. And basically just sort of, when you're beating, just sort of pull it and press it into where you want it, as opposed to doing a real hard beat. If that makes sense.
Yeah.
And then I also end up, you know, the first few passes of a solid thing, I will often, you know, measure how wide is it in my warp, and then I'll look and measure it in my weft too and make sure it's about the same.
Yeah, I
It
have a
doesn't-
tendency, I'm sorry, I have a tendency to beat really hard.
So you'll have to try and resist that tendency, because otherwise you'll get all of your things will look like rectangles instead of squares. The first tartan I made, I didn't pay as close of attention as I should have, so I ended up probably having more picks than I was supposed to, just in order to make it square. Which works, but it's not ideal because then it gets you off of your color order. Let's see, what else do you all need to know before you start weaving? Any other questions or things that you're thinking about?
Well, just general questions.
Yeah.
Is there such a thing as an unbalanced plaid where the, I guess there isn't as definite a repeat of the color changes as we have, so that you might have more or fewer going one way rather than the other way? Is there such a thing, or is that just, you know, one being beating too hard or something like that? I mean, can you plan something like that? Does it still make it a plaid, or does it look good? I don't know.
You know, I don't think so. I think, because I think when I've looked at like the Scottish Register of Tartans, their assumption is that the color order that you're doing is the same in the warp as it is in the weft, with the same number of beats and the same number of picks. So I suppose it would be really more of just a striped pattern of some kind as opposed to an actual tartan.
Okay. So it's this using 4 as a unit, or divisions of 4, or multiples of 4 as a unit that make it a tartan or a plaid, because I think for it to be a tartan, it's got to be registered technically.
If you want it to be official. I mean, I make up a lot of different sort of plaid or tartan kinds of designs, just using whatever colors I have and whatever colors I want to put together. And they're not necessary. I don't register them with anybody. I just put them together because I like the colors together. I'm also a person who, as Elizabeth knows, I like symmetry. So that's what I do. So I think the only other place where you might end up having things, there's basically 2 different kinds of tartans, I guess, in terms of how the patterns work. There's the one like this one where you have a pattern and then it gets to a certain point and then it repeats and you start it over backwards. The other kind that I have seen is one where it's basically you do your colors and then you start over with those same colors and you don't actually repeat them backwards.
Okay.
So it would be like doing you do a red, a blue, and a green, and then you start over with the red, blue, green, and you do them in the same order that you did the first time, rather than doing a red, blue, green, an accent, and then a green, red, blue,
Okay.
or whatever order they were in.
So tartan is one kind of plaid and plaid is something else altogether, sort of less
Well,
structured.
Actually, in reality, the plaid is the garment. The tartan is the design.
Ah,
So officially, as far as the Scottish are concerned, the plaid is the draped thing that they're wearing.
Really?
They're wearing a plaid, but the plaid might be a solid color.
Okay, but it's the thing. Okay, huh?
okay.
And so the tartan is actually what is the design.
Right.
And then
But we being who we are have taken it and we just, a plaid is a plaid is a plaid.
Well, when I was growing up and had to sew, and I had uneven plaids, and trying to match those plaids in the right places, I knew that as plaid, so I didn't know.
Yeah.
Yeah. So interesting.
Yes, and sewing with plaids is hard because it is trying to make everything match without wasting a lot of fabric is.
That's where gray hair comes from.
Okay, then the difference between a check and a tartan, okay, because we use that, is that the check is basically a shorter repeat of colors. As I think you can have a check with 3 colors. It isn't just 2 colors. So I think of blue and white check, you know, the gingham.
Yeah. Well, the thing about if I was thinking about checks, so one of the things is one of the reasons that, like, if you have a blue and white gingham, there really is only 2 colors. It's just, it looks like there's more than 2 because you have solid white places, you've got solid blue places, and then you've got where they cross over, and you've got blue and white together, which ends up making it look like a different color.
Mm-hmm.
And usually with a check, you've got all of your stripes are the same size.
Okay.
Whereas with tartans, the stripes are very seldom the same size. And some of them are very intricate in terms of, you know, you have 2 and then 2 and then 2 of different colors, and I'll give you all guys all next week the link to the Scottish Register of Tartans so you can go in and explore. It's really interesting looking at what there is, because I know there are some of the patterns in there, like the Stuart tartan has dress Stuart, ancient Stuart, so you can look at Stuart and there's probably, 10 or 15 different kinds of tartans that go with the Stuarts. But it's fun looking at them because, like when I was initially exploring, Harley Davidson has a tartan in there, and different cities or states have registered tartans. So there's a lot of different things you can look, and there's lots and lots and lots of variation. So it gives you a good sense of, okay, here's all the different ways people use tartans. I was looking back through my photos and looking at my different projects, and I've come to the conclusion I really like tartans. I've made a lot of them.
Well, yeah.
Well, if you like color, you have an excellent opportunity to play with it.
Exactly. If you like color and if you like symmetry, because they're almost always symmetrical too. So, yeah.
So how much do you want to have us accomplish by next Sunday? You want us to have them woven off and cut so we can show them off?
If you could, that would be awesome. I would love to have people be able to show them off. Otherwise, if you have a way to just be able to show on your loom what you've gotten done, that would be okay too.
Okay.
If you are not familiar with hem stitching and you want to just still have it on your loom so that you can do the hem stitch as you hem stitch it off, you may not want to have it all the way off.
I think clumsy is the word I would use for my hem stitching.
How many of you get Handwoven magazine?
I do.
I do.
I have seen some projects in there where they have some different kinds of hem stitching besides just the one that is in. I mean, they have one at the back that usually shows you a hem stitch. But I had another project that used what they called Calandoni knots. That was actually really interesting because it was one where you are just wrapping the threads and you're not going up into the fabric below it at all. It's just it was just a mechanism for wrapping everything so that everything wraps tight. It was really interesting. I'll have to find it again and see.
Was it similar to twining?
I don't know. I'm not sure what twining is.
Oh, okay. The thing that frustrates me with Handwoven and their picture of the hem stitching, they only show it at one end. They'll
That's
show you
true.
how to do the beginning, and then you get to the other end, it's like, how do I do this standing on my head?
Yeah, exactly. Yes, that is true. You really, you do have to sort of think, you have to reframe it in your head to do it correctly. Yeah,
Exactly.
that's true. That's true.
And that is more difficult some days than others.
That's true too. Some days it's really hard.
There is a small book, I mean, and it isn't expensive, that is on all different ways of hem stitching and other ways of finishing off. And it does include, when you're doing it from left to right. So right to left and left to right.
Yeah.
And it's not expensive. I'll try to remember to have it at hand next time so you can look at it and see what it is.
Oh, is it that little handbook of weaving techniques or whatever it is, Judith? Is it like a little spiral bound thing?
No, it's a bound book.
Oh, okay.
I just can't remember. Of course, I never remember authors' names and that. I'm just going to try an experiment. Does that show up? Yes, it does. So if you don't have your project finished, you could use your phone and use a phone picture.
Actually, that's true.
Yeah. Okay, now I learned something. You can do that.
Anything else you want to, and I will say this again, that if you have questions as you're starting your weaving and something seems like it's not going right, don't hesitate to send me an email and we can have either a little Zoom call or a FaceTime or something to sort you out.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. I think that's all my questions I had written down.
Jeannie, Julie, Elizabeth, Diane, any other questions you guys have?
No, I'm good.
I think I am too.
So far, so good.
Cool. So hopefully you all have good success with your weaving this week. And Julie and Elizabeth, hopefully you're not so buried that you can actually get your work on. That's a drag that you didn't have the right size reed, Julie. That's always frustrating.
I pulled it out and I'm like, I thought this one was a different one. Apparently not. So,
Bummer.
So many.
Okay, so next week we'll deal a little bit we'll talk about hem stitching. I'll give you some additional resources that have like the Scottish Register of Tartans and some other, I think there's a couple of other things. At one point there was a thing where you could design your own tartan online, but when I went back to it, it was gone. So it may or may not.
I do have some others though, Jeannie.
Yeah, I think there are more.
Yeah, there are others. Some are more complicated to use than others.
Well, frankly, even if you had just a regular weaving software, you could put in the colors and the 2-2 twill or the plain weave that you wanted to do, and you could look and see what it's going to look like.
Well, that brings up a question then. What weaving software does everybody use, or anybody use, I guess I should say? I don't have one that. I just use the online ones, and there's a limit to how much I can change them or that.
I think I have mine's an evaluation copy because I'm not willing to pay for it. Of Pixie Loom, I think is the one that I have on my
Pixie Loom or Pixie Loom?
Pixie Loom.
Pixie Loom, okay.
The only problem with the evaluation copy is you can't say what you do, and you can basically look at it. And to be honest with you, Judith, as you probably know, I tend to just use graph paper.
Yeah.
Graph paper and colored pencils, my favorite.
Yep.
Found erasable colored pencils.
Yeah.
Low tech here.
Yeah, there is something to be said for colored pencils and graph paper.
Absolutely.
Okay, if nobody has any other questions, I'll turn you loose and you can have 10 minutes extra to work on your weaving.
Okay,
Thank you.
Thank
Thank
you.
you.
Thank you for the
Good to see
class.
everybody. See you next week.
okay, bye.
Thanks.
Elizabeth,
Yeah.
I sent you an email earlier because my computer had crashed. And by the time I got back in the house, everything was working. So just ignore my email, okay?
Oh, okay. I
Thank
must
you.
have missed it.
Well, it worked out okay. The computer came back. So
Okay, good.
thank you.
Yep.
Okay. Bye-bye.
Bye.